Hello class, today we are covering section 5.6, inequalities in two triangles and indirect proofs. Turn to page 337 and look at theorems 5.13 and 5.14. You have the hinge theorem. It says, if two sides of one triangle are congruent to two sides of another triangle, and the included angle of the first is larger than the included angle of the second, then the third side of the first is longer than the third side of the second. So as you can see, we have two pairs of congruent sides. We have our included angle, 88 degrees and 35 degrees. We notice that 88 is bigger than 35, and by the hinge theorem, it's saying that side WX is greater than side ST. Theorem 5.14 is the converse. We know what converse means. Conditional statement is if P then Q. The converse is if Q then P. So the converse says, if two sides of one triangle are congruent to two sides of another triangle, and the third side of the first is longer than the third side of the second, then the included angle of the first is larger than the included angle of the second. So as you can see, we have two pairs of congruent sides again. My first triangle, that side measures bigger than the second. So the included angle, remember what we said about included angle. It's the angle in between my two sides. So angle C is in between sides AC and CB. So this is the included angle. It is supposed to be bigger than my included angle, which is angle F. So here it says the measure of angle C is greater than the measure of angle F. Turn to page 340 and look at the skill practice. Number 3 says copy and complete with less than, greater than, or equal. Explain. Look at number 3. Number 3, remember we're applying the hinge theorem. So we want to keep that theorem in mind and the converse. If I look at this triangle, I have two triangles, triangles ABD and triangles CBD. If I notice, look at my angle here is 36 degrees. The way you read this angle is you read it as angle ABD is 36 degrees. This angle here is 32 degrees, and you read it as angle CBD is 32 degrees. But what I notice is I have sides AB and BC are congruent because they're marked. I also know that sides BD is congruent to BD again by reflexive property. So I have two pairs of congruent sides. So we're going to apply my hinge theorem. And the hinge theorem tells us that if I see my congruent sides and my first angle is bigger than my second angle, then that means that AD, side AD, is larger than side DC. So my answer here will be greater than. It will be greater than by theorem 5.13. We're going to jump to number 5. Look at number 5. Number 5, I see two pairs of congruent sides. Side ST, side QT is congruent to side US. And side QR is congruent to side RS. So we need to pay attention to our included angles. Angle RSU is 24 degrees and angle TQR is 22 degrees. So by the Hinge theorem, it tells us that if my first angle is bigger than my second angle, then the first side, which is side RU, is bigger than my side TR. So my answer here is TR is less than UR by, again, theorem 5.13. We've also talked about some things before we got to the Hinge theorem. Just use what you know. If this angle is 24 degrees, then of course this side is going to be bigger. If this angle is 22 degrees, then of course this side is going to be smaller. Okay, we talked about the different relationships within triangles. So we know that this angle measure works with this side and this angle measure works with that side. So you have to just use what you know to figure it out as well, and also apply the new information, which is our Hinge theorem. Number 7, we're looking at the same directions. We want to determine if the measured angle 1 is less than, greater than, or equal to the measured angle 2. So we want to pay attention to our diagram here. If you notice on this diagram, they didn't give us any letters, so we're just going to go with what we know. We do have two angle measures. We have angle 1 and angle 2. I see I have a pair of congruent sides and I have another pair of congruent sides. But this one is a little different, okay, than our previous two examples. And the reason why is because if I look here, this is the same side. This third side is the same. So we can say that these are congruent triangles by S, side, side, side. And we know that this side here is congruent by the reflexive property. Now, we also know that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. We learned that back in chapter 4. So, these are my side measures, and they're congruent to each other by reflexive property. And their corresponding parts is going to be the angles directly across from the side. So, since I know that these sides are congruent, that means angle 1 and angle 2 are also congruent. Because again, we know that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are equal. So my answer for this question is equal. Look at number 9, multiple choice. Which is the possible measure of angle JKM? If we apply the Hinge theorem again, we see that sides KL and KJ are congruent, and KM is congruent to MK by reflexive property. So we have our included angle, which is 25. We do not have the other included angle. But if you notice, we do have sides LM and MJ, which is 8 and 6. So we're going to apply the converse. And the converse tells us that if we have two pairs of congruent sides, and if the first side is larger than the other side, then that means that the first angle measure will be bigger than the second angle measure. So since 8 is the bigger side, 25 will be the bigger angle. And if 6 is a smaller side, then my angle has to be a number smaller than 25 degrees. So we look at our answer choices here. We know off the top that it's not going to be C. It's not going to be B because they don't equal, and 30 is bigger than 25. It has to be less than 25 by the converse of the hinge theorem. Cannot be determined? Well, we already know it's going to be a number smaller. So the answer for this question will be A. Let's look at number 16. It says algebra. Use the hinge theorem or its converse and properties of triangles to write and solve an inequality to describe a restriction on the value of x. Inequalities are less than, greater than, less than, equal to, greater than, equal to signs. Applying the hinge theorem and its converse, I see that I have a side that are congruent, because they're both 12, so these sides are congruent to each other. I also see that by the reflexive property that this side and the side connect, the two sides here are congruent. The two sides coincide. So that's by reflexive property. I also see that by the hinge theorem, I notice that 15 is larger than 13. If 15 is larger, that means angle 66 is larger than this unknown angle. So whatever this angle is, it has to be a number smaller than 66. By the hinge theorem, if this side is larger, this angle is larger. If this side is the smallest, then this side is the smaller angle. It tells us to write an inequality. Now, the missing part, my expression is 2x plus 5. I know that whatever this angle is, it has to be smaller than 66. So how we write this angle? How we write this inequality? The way we will write this inequality is we're going to say 2x plus 5 is less than 66. And we talked about that with the hinge theorem, that if 13 is smaller than 15, that means the angle for 13 that relates to 13 should be smaller too. So now we just solve for x. Solving for x, we're going to apply the subtraction property of equality. So we're going to subtract 5 on both sides. 5's go to 0. I'm left with 2x is less than, and we have 66 minus 5, which is 61. Then we're going to apply division property of equality. So we're going to divide by 2 on both sides. The 2's cancel to 1. I'm left with x is less than 30.5. Or you can say 30 and 1/2. So whatever my value is for x, it has to be a number that's less than 30.5. So when I plug in a number less than 30.5 for x, it's going to be smaller than 66 degrees. Look at number 17. Number 17, we want to pay attention to what are we actually trying to set up. We want to pay attention to the sides that are congruent and which angles is the included angle. So we want to really pay attention to that. What I do notice, I see two sides that are congruent. I see another pair of sides that are congruent by reflexive property. My side here is 3 and 3. And then this side here is congruent to each other by reflexive property. So from here, we need to look at these diagrams and identify which angles is the included angle. If I notice, I mark this side and I mark this side here. So my included angle is going to be in between the two sides. So we're looking at 110. So we know opposite of 110 is my side 3x plus 2. This one you want to pay attention to a little closer. This is the side that I marked, and this is the second side I marked. So my included angle is actually the angle that's right here. This angle that's right here. So you have to be really careful with that because they don't give us that measurement, and you can choose the wrong angle by mistake. But remember, it's the included angle. It is going to be the angle that's in between the two sides that you are working with. I am working with this side here and this side of the triangle, so this is my included angle. Now, how do we find this missing angle, though? Well, I'm looking at this triangle here at the bottom, right, to the right. I have a measure of 102, a measure of 27, so how can I find this angle here? Well, we talked about the triangle sum theorem. We know the triangle sum theorem tells us that my interior angles will add to equal 180. So if I just take 180, we're going to do shortcuts. Degrees minus 102 degrees minus 27 degrees is going to equal 51 degrees. So we know that my included angle, which is this angle here, is 51 degrees. Okay, so when I'm talking about the angle, I'm talking about this angle here is 51 degrees. Now, let's apply our hinge theorem. So we know by the hinge theorem, and we're on the converse this time because we have the side measures. And it says here that if I have my two pairs of congruent sides, my first angle is going to be larger than my second angle, right? So by the hinge theorem, we know that since my first angle is larger, 110 is bigger than 51, that means that 3x plus 2 is going to be larger than x plus 3. Let's go over that again. By the hinge theorem, since 110 is larger than 51 degrees, side 3x plus 2 will be larger than x plus 3. So now, since we know that, we're going to write our inequality out and solve for x. We have 3x plus 2 is greater than x plus 3. Now we're going to solve for x. I want to first combine my like terms. We have 3x. When I move the minus from the right to the left, it becomes minus x. Greater than. Bring my 3 down. When I move my plus 2 from the left to the right, it becomes minus 2. So I have 2x is greater than 1. After this, I want to divide both sides by 2. 2's cancel to 1. So x is greater than 1/2. So whatever my value for x is, it has to be a number that is greater than 1/2. And if I was to find that number, whatever this side is, it will be smaller than the measure of this side. Okay, so that is it for my notes on section 5.6. You need to check your Edmodo post, or if we're in Google Classroom, check that post to see if I have any further instructions for you concerning the notes. So make sure you check your post. All right, study.